On this podcast, we've talked a lot about the musical things that you should do that we'll recap today. Things such as learning your instrument, learning your theory, and so much more. But there are other things that you should learn too if you really want to be the best musician you can be, and we're going to talk about that. Whether you're a self-taught musician, have a teacher, or you're already a professional, this show is meant to help you with knowledge, mindset, craft, and strategies to improve your overall musicianship so that you can become the best musician you can be regardless of your goals. Welcome to Musicianship Mastery. Hello and welcome to episode number 120. My name is David Lane and it is great to be with you once again. So think of this episode today as an introduction to some of the minor musicianship tools. If you're fairly new, this podcast began as the Musician Toolkit, and that was its name through episode 100. So for the past 20 episodes, we've been Musicianship Mastery, but before then we were the Musician Toolkit. And it was all based on the idea that there are tools of musicianship that you should develop as well as you can to be the most well-rounded and complete musician that you can be. And I won't go over all of those once again, but I'll give you some of them. It's the ability to sight read. It's a well-trained ear. It's becoming an expert in the art of practicing. It's the ability to compose. It's the ability to improvise. It's the ability to transpose. The ability to look at any written rhythm and be able to play it with accuracy. It's knowing how to listen to a piece of music analytically, how to lead other musicians, how to follow other musicians. I think I might have said already how to play a primary instrument really well, but also how to play more than one instrument. It's the ability to sing. It's the ability to understand the piano keyboard even if it's not your main instrument. It's knowledge of music theory. It's knowledge of music history. And there's certainly a few other things that I talked about, but let's just start with that, as those are a lot of the major skills that we have talked about and that we'll continue to talk about, because even though we're no longer the Musician Toolkit, I still think those tools are important. But there's some things that I think that it's worthwhile for you to learn anyway that aren't really included on that list, or maybe a little bit more vague or a little bit more detailed, I should say, than what is on that list. So this episode probably won't be too long. I just have 6 things I'm going to offer now, and as if more comes to mind later, I might do a sequel episode as like more things that you should learn anyway. But for now, here are 6 things that I think that you should learn that have nothing to do with your instrument, that you should learn anyway. And the first one is all of the common clefs. Now, if you have only played piano before, this might surprise you. There's more than 2. You have treble clef and you have bass clef. In fact, if you play a lot of instruments in band or orchestra, not all of them, but a lot of them, you may have only seen one of these, treble clef or bass clef. You also have alto clef and tenor clef. Alto clef is almost exclusively played by the viola. However, I have found it very helpful when I am sketching ideas for orchestra and I don't want to transpose right away for instruments like the French horn, or like an alto saxophone part, or for English horn, or for any number of instruments that are a little bit too low to put in treble clef, but a little bit too high to comfortably put it in bass clef. It's a nice neutral thing. You also have the tenor clef, which isn't played exclusively by any instruments, but is often what is expected that you will include for instruments like the cello, bassoon, and trombone if you get too high for bass clef, rather than going to treble clef. I promise you, you don't want to see the look on the face of a cellist or a bassoonist if you go to treble clef when you could have gone to tenor. So now, if your goal is to be a composer or a conductor, you need to know all of your clefs. You need to be able to read all of these. But whatever your instrument is, it allows you to explore music written for other instruments. It allows you to explore everything that's out there because you're really limited if you play, say, any woodwind instrument other than bassoon, and all you can do is read treble clef. You should be fluent enough that you can pick up any score in any of the modern clefs and figure it out fairly quickly. So I'm going to tell you from my own experience what are two good approaches to learning music in any clef, and what is one that I would definitely avoid. So the one that I would definitely avoid is trying to transpose a clef you know into one that you don't. So like if you know treble clef and you've looked at alto clef, you can probably figure out that whatever it looks like it would be in treble clef, if you go up a step, that's the name of the letter in alto clef. Well, I've said before, I don't think shortcuts like that work when you're reading music. It works if you're trying to answer it on a test. It doesn't work for actually reading it, and especially if you want to play from a score. You want to see the clef, the new clef, just the way you would see your own, not comparing it to something else, but knowing it just as it is. So the best ways to do that is to actually write music in those clefs. And it might be that you're arranging some music. It doesn't have to be original music, but you want to write music for just alto clef, write music for just tenor clef. And of course, if you're not comfortable with either treble or bass clef, write music for that too. Another way that you can practice this is to get books written for instruments that play those clefs. So like if you want to get better at bass clef, I recommend going to get a cello, bassoon, or trombone book. If you want to learn alto clef, go get some music written for viola. And name these letters out loud. Just read through it and name each note out loud. And maybe even go to your instrument and play it while you're looking at those clefs. Same thing with tenor clef, although again, it's probably hard to do that because there's just not a lot of music that is written just for tenor clef. So that's the first thing I recommend. Learn all of your common clefs. And historically, there are a lot more than 4 clefs. I do realize that, but there are 4 modern clefs that you're going to find. And once you learn that, you can pick up an orchestral score and you can figure out everything you're looking at. The second thing that I would have you do is to learn how to use a DAW, a DAW, that stands for Digital Audio Workstation. I use Logic Pro, but there's so many out there. There's Cubase, there's Digital Performer, there's Pro Tools, but something that you can record instruments in multiple tracks, whether it be live instruments or whether it be MIDI virtual instruments. This is a way to make music. It's also a way that you can record yourself doing multiple things at one time. My suggestion is just to confidently choose one and go all in and learn it as well as you can. There's almost nothing you could choose that you can't find an abundance of good YouTube video tutorials on how to use it. The third thing that you need to learn how to use that I would recommend is a notation program. Because when you're composing and when you're arranging, you're going to want to put things on there, but also you might be teaching someone and you want to create exercises. And believe me when I say that nobody wants to see your handwritten music. If it's even twice as good as what mine looks like, no one wants to see it. We have had episodes, a couple of episodes with Jason Lafredo all about music notation. Unfortunately, Finale is not an option anymore. I am learning Dorico. In fact, I'm going to talk about my experience with Dorico in the near future. But there's also Sibelius. There's also other options out there that are not as expensive. But get yourself a notation program, learn to use it, and practice using it. Something else you should learn how to do is how to plan a lesson for a student. Now, let me clarify that. That's not to say you should be a teacher and that you should teach a student. If you do teach a student, if you are a teacher, then yes, you should learn how to plan a lesson. But it's a good exercise even if your student is imaginary, or maybe your student is yourself. You are teaching yourself. Think about what a 30 or 45 minute or a 60-minute lesson would look like if you were teaching a student like yourself, or if you were teaching a student like yourself that's maybe not quite as far along. what will you go over? How you spend that time? There are lots of books on pedagogy, and again, lots of YouTube videos on this very thing, lots of articles, blog posts. But think about, how would you approach teaching somebody what you know, or teaching yourself to become a better version of who you are right now. Something else that you should learn. Now, one of the main tools is knowledge of music theory, but I'm going to go a little deeper than that. I think that you should spend time studying the Baroque rules of part writing. And this is something that I really resisted when I had to start learning it when I was in college. This is the first time I was exposed to this. But I have found it really helpful as an arranger. It's a set of guidelines that can help you write things that you know are going to sound smooth, they're going to sound successful, it's just going to hit a Western ear with satisfaction, and that you can choose willingly to deviate from. So it's not a set of rules that you have to follow, but it's a set of guidelines that you're aware of will produce a certain sound, will produce a certain result. So now there are entire semesters devoted to this very thing, and so it's impossible for me in just a few minutes to really go over everything. So I would study it as a practice. You can get theory books that teach this very thing. I'm a big fan of Tonal Harmony by Casca and Payne, which has been out in several editions, but it is far from being the only book that will help you with this. But also getting a workbook so that you can practice doing some part writing by, for example, if you're given a bass line, you can add 3 parts above, or if you're given a melody line, you can do 3 parts below. Some general rules, though, that will really help you. If it's not the bass or if it's not the soprano, avoid skipping. Try to repeat notes and try to move up by step. Second, oblique motion and contrary makes for smoother motions than parallel motion. That is to say, contrary motion is when one voice moves up and the other moves down. There's almost no guidelines that prohibit that type of motion. But another safe bet is what's called oblique, which is that one voice moves up or down and the other one stays still. Parallel motion works fine for a lot of intervals, but not for fifths and not for octaves. And the reason for that, by the way, is because the fifth and the octave are very stable, but so is the third, so is the sixth, and so is the fourth. The reason those intervals can move around is that they are not stable in the same way. They are consonant. But it's kind of like comparing a brick house to an RV. Your fifth and your octave, these are your brick houses. They are stable, but they also want to stay put. Your thirds, your sixths, and your fourths, these are stable to a point and they are consonant, but they can move around because they are like RVs. So that is as fast as I can explain just a few things when it comes to part leading. Some other things you might want to keep in mind is just prioritize. When you're doing 4 or more parts, you're going to have a doubling of at least one note of a chord. Your root is usually your first good bet. The fifth also works. The third is usually the worst choice because it's the most sensitive part of the chord. So like if you have a C chord, 2 C's is fine, 2 G's is fine, 2 E's you should probably avoid. And the last thing that I'd recommend for now, I'm sure there's a lot more that will come to mind later. Again, musical things that you can learn that have nothing to do with your instrument and that are not directly related to the major tools that we've talked about quite a bit, is you should learn how to read an orchestral score. So just a primer on this is that on a typical score, you have the woodwinds at the top, and they will tend to go from your flute family on top, followed by your oboe family, followed by the clarinet family, and followed by the bassoons. And of course, you could have other instruments in there like saxophones and instruments that are related to what I just mentioned. And then you're going to have a section for your brass. Now, if it's an orchestral score, you're going to start off with the French horns, which are close to the woodwinds. They sometimes blend in with the woodwinds, so this is why they're on top. But then you have the trumpets below that, and then you have trombones, and if you had euphonium, it would go below that, and then you have the tuba. Below that, you're going to have your percussion sections, starting with the timpani if you have one, and then followed by all the other percussion. Sometimes it could be a line for each instrument, and sometimes it could be a part for each player that will change instruments as it goes. Then you have a section for just about everything that you might not always have. So you have a section where you could put your harp, where you could put a piano, if a piano is included as an orchestral instrument, where you might find like your celesta. It's also a place where if you're adding a chorus, a choir to your orchestral piece, you would find that here, again, below the percussion. It's also where you would put your soloist if it's a concerto. And then below all of that is your string section, typically a line for first violins, one for second violins, one for violas, one for cellos, and one for double basses. Now, if you happen to pick up something by Mozart, or I would say Beethoven or earlier, a lot of times the cellos and basses are on the same line. This is actually why it's called a double bass. It doubles the cello line quite often, especially in earlier like Baroque and classical era music. But when the bass plays along, it sounds an octave lower than the cello. And if you read along, sometimes it'll say cello only here or basses only here, so there's a way to get around them both having to play all the time together. Now that's just how to know what you're looking at. It's not a bad idea to learn the common names of the instruments in Italian, in French, in German, because you get a lot of scores in those languages. You also want to understand how to figure out what the instrument is in concert pitch if it's a transposing instrument. And this can be all kinds of things depending on how old the score is. So there's a time that your brass instrument did not have valves, so your instruments were in the key of D if your symphony was in the key of D. Whereas now your trumpets would be B-flat trumpets or sometimes C trumpets, and your French horns are going to be F horns. F doesn't stand for French. It actually stands for it's a horn in F. That is to say, when a horn player plays a written middle C for them, it sounds like an F on a piano or on a concert pitch instrument. Now, if anything I said is confusing, that's okay. That's why you should learn this. This is why you should take time and just take one of these for now. Take one of them for now. Spend a few months on it, get to a point where you feel like you've learned a bit, and then pick another one. You don't have to learn all 6 at one time, and it could be that you don't feel like the need to do all of that. But I do think these are some things that if you'll take time to learn them in addition to your instrument, it'll just help you to be a better overall musician. Feel free to let me know your thoughts on this episode with your voice by going to speakpipe.com/musician toolkit. I'll say that again just in case I didn't enunciate it well. Speakpipe, pipe.com/musician toolkit. And you can let me know with just a text, just an email by going to my website at davidlanemusic.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody, and if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe if you haven't already and click the thumbs up on this video. As always, I appreciate you so much for listening. Thank you so much, and I'll be back with you again next week.